All right, I'm here with Stefan Hartman, and I just have to tell you, your summit presentation was really quite successful. We got a lot of great feedback on it. So thank you so much for joining us for the Long COVID Reset Summit. And so I was really interested in just reconnecting with you to get a take on some other topics. And I know that you had prepared a presentation on the ancestral diet, which I myself am very interested in hearing about and learning more about, because I really do also kind of align with you on that kind of ancestral approach to health. So if you have a presentation, we can go ahead and share that on the screen.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm glad to be back and talking about my favorite subject, ancestral diet and all things health optimization. You have to allow sharing of screen for me. Aha. Here we go. Ancestral diet. All right. Let's start right on it. So I do house calls for my patients. It's oftentimes how I meet them. I go to their house and I do a kitchen inventory. So I go through their fridge, and I find this to be more accurate than any blood test, where I've gotten so good at it that I can look in their fridge and I know what their vitamin levels are going to be at. But this is pretty typical what you're seeing here. So highly processed foods, a lot of the seed oils, and they may not even know, I mean, you can obviously see a seed oil, corn oil there, the yellow liquid, but it's in a lot of their condiments in their fridge. And I would sometimes pull out, like, it'll cover their whole countertop, condiments. Like, so much condiment is in their fridge. And every one of these condiments is cottonseed oil, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, you name it. And people have no idea how much of this they're consuming. But besides that, their protein intake is super low. The protein quality is super low. And they're also consuming a large proportion of high fructose corn syrup and sugars. So if we're looking at root cause analysis for patients, you take a look at their fridge, you look at what they're eating, right? I talk a lot about this with my functional medicine colleagues. Like, we can talk about higher end peptides, methane blue, oxytocin, NAD, glutathione, right? Great supplements, right? But if they're eating garbage all day long, you can take all the nice quercetin and anti-aging supplements you want, but they're putting pollution into the body every day and have no nutrients. And sure, you can do a comprehensive Genova diagnostics analysis on these people. It's very expensive, but just, you know what their body's gonna be by looking at their fridge. But, you know, even outside of functional medicine, you know, even mainstream is getting on board with this. So the Lancet is saying that, hey, there's an epidemic of metabolic dysfunction, and it's probably not just calories in, calories out that's making people so sick, right? And metabolic dysfunction covers a whole process of diseases, from cancers, heart disease, and in my opinion, also the long COVID patients, both the vaccine injured and the wild type. I actually kind of stumbled upon this myself. I had what, in my opinion, was a bit of an autoimmune or arthritic type of condition. I had lateral epicondylitis. This is known as tennis elbow. And if you look at up to date, what causes tennis elbow, they say it's the novice tennis player. Well, I'm far from novice, right? I play professional tennis. I'm actually the North American Medical Tennis Championship. I'm the best tennis playing medical professional there is currently, all right? Until they have another tournament, and then I'll see if I can beat them again. So it's not a novice. So what is the cause of my tennis elbow? Well, I did the conventional treatment, right? I did ibuprofens. I did the rehab for this, the icing. It didn't work. You know, it pretty much ended my tennis career. But I figured out that the ancestral diet could fix this for myself. And it was cutting out a lot of the junk I was consuming. I was unaware of this back in my early college days. You know, I was eating the conventional diet, a lot of bread products. You know, they told you need to carb fill with gluten to performance and all that stuff. And I had no idea what a seed oil was back then. It wasn't on my radar. But there's a lot of practical reasons towards why I recommend the ancestral diet for patients. And the most practical reason is it reduces the amount of supplements they're having to consume every day. And it's cheap, right? You can get all your nutrients and vitamins if you eat the ancestral diet. And so it's way affordable. I do work with a low income population here in Melbourne, and not all my patients can afford, Quicksilver Scientific supplements. But besides that, the ancestral diet, it reduces the toxic load that's on these people's bodies, right? It's the hateful eight seed oils, canola, cottonseed, safflower oil. They're pro-oxidant, they're pro-inflammatory. They're also endocrine disruptors. They lower men's testosterone. They're estrogen mimickers, specifically the soybean oil types. And there's just so much pollution that people are putting onto the body. They're doing cologne every day. They're doing deodorants, and they're using fragrances. And we know fragrances, these are not FDA controlled or USDA approved. You don't know what you're getting with a fragrance. They're getting food coloring and dyes. It just adds to their toxic burden. And don't even get me started on the sunscreen that everyone's lathering onto their bodies, right? I tell my patients this, I was like, I prescribe testosterone replacement therapy. A very effective way of delivering testosterone to the body is a topical application of testosterone. It gets absorbed through the skin. Now, what do you think happens with sunscreen? It gets absorbed through the skin. Now, in testosterone, we want that to cause an effect, and it has a lot of beneficial effects on the body. But what happens when you apply sunscreen into the skin and it disappears after 60 minutes and you have to reapply it? Well, it's also causing an effect on the body, and we really don't know what it's doing, but it's been pulled off the shelves multiple times for cancer-causing properties.
What's confusing to a lot of people is there's a heart healthy, like American Medical Association or American Heart Association label on a lot of the seed oils, like especially canola oil for a long time.
And we're gonna get to that, and we're gonna see that even the American College of Cardiology is starting to wake up on this. And so there's been increasing alarm that some of these vegetable oils are not so healthy. And one of the most important things, you can run these panels on patients. They're called omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, or omega quants. You can get it done, not too expensive, Quest LabCorp. You can see what their ratios are at. But I don't run these too often. I just know that they're eating a lot of omega-6s, right? So we try to reduce that best we can. And some practitioners in functional medicine, they believe in supplementing omega-3s, and that's a great way to improve the ratio. And we do that in the long COVID protocol, omega-3s. But another way to do that is just reduce the amount of omega-6s you're consuming. And we'll see in a little bit, I have a chart on how potent these are. So we have here a cool graph of the overall incidence of seed oil consumption over the past, let's see, this goes back 100 years. We can see that actually saturated fat has kind of dropped off over time, and really these seed oils have increased in the consumption rates, soybean oil in particular. Now, we can say correlation doesn't equal causation, but we just have to look to the farmers, our good farmer friends, and they know very well that the addition of soybean oil significantly improves the body weight of broilers during the total and growth rearing periods. So farmers know if you want to fatten up your chicken, you feed it soybean oil, right? But somehow we can't apply this to humans, although we know that all of our drugs are initially done trials on the animal models. So we can extrapolate this to humans, maybe put 2 and 2 together here. But we kind of got into this whole mess of the seed oils and the healthy food pyramid. It started in the 1960s when vegetable oil and margarine producers exploited the AMA's consequent recommendation to replace butter and lard with vegetable oil. And there was a lot of momentum behind this. The history is kind of interesting. There was the heart attack by Dwight D. Eisenhower that kind of put it into a media sensation of what's causing heart attacks. And then there was some studies that we'll see a little bit later that kind of misrepresented saturated fat and the associations with heart disease. So there's like 100-year momentum behind this. It's very difficult to shift public opinion on this. But I think the year 2023 will be the paradigm shift, and seed oils will be now mainstream known as not so good for you. You can just look at how these things are made in the factory. So this is an example of what is canola oil, but canola oil doesn't actually exist. That's actually good branding. It's actually rapeseed oil. So rapeseed oil is actually a machine lubricant that was used during World War II for the battleships and weapons. This was a Canadian export. Now, Canada had a surplus of this after World War II. And then what did they do? Well, rapeseed oil doesn't sound politically correct. So they rebranded it as Canada Oil. And so we got canola oil. All right. And that's how that came to the US. Big export, Canada. But the way that's processed, it's highly heated. So when you overheat any oil, even olive oil is great for you. But if you nuke this thing with heat, it turns into a bit of a pro-oxidant, right? You get these free radical formations. This is a fancy term that people like to throw around. But if it's simple enough, is what happens is the carbon chain kind of breaks, and then you get this hydrogen atom, it pops off. And this hydrogen atom, it can bond to things, this carbon chain, it becomes a bit oxidized. You can mutate DNA that way. And look at this chart here. I really like this chart. It's the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And you can see, you can take all the fish oil you want to try to balance this ratio. But if you're consuming something like, say, soybean oil that has 50,293 milligrams of omega-6 to 7,000 milligrams of omega-3, it's very difficult to balance this, right? And I see some influencers on Instagram saying that, oh, canola oil has omega-3s. Well, yeah, it does have some omega-3s, but it also has a lot of omega-6s. And if you're trying to balance this, you want to potentially reduce these highly, and don't even get me started on grapeseed oil and sunflower oil and cottonseed oil. Cottonseed oil is probably the worst offender with 51,000 milligrams of omega-6 to only 200 milligrams of omega-3s. It's very difficult to beat this one with fish oil supplementation, although fish oil supplementation is great. But the fish matters as well. So the farm-raised salmon is fed actually seeds and vegetable oils. So you can actually make the meat profile of the salmon high omega-6. So it's no longer good for you omega-3 fatty fish. It's farm-raised omega-6 fatty fish. So the quality of the meats matters as well.
And the same goes for things that we don't normally consider high in omega-3s. We can raise their omega-3 levels, like for beef, for example, you can improve the omega-3 kind of.
So I have chickens in my backyard, and I just feed them a non-seed oil grain. I try to get them bugs. I try to get them even meat. You know, my chickens are meat eaters. People think they're vegetarians. They're not. They love meat. If I give them beef liver, they'll gobble it up raw. Oh, yeah. And we'll get to the beef thing later, too. I have a very interesting point on that. So let's talk about the American College of Cardiology. I mean, this came out in about 2020, and it kind of flew under the radar. But they said that they've perhaps been wrong for the past 40 years, and that the standard lipid panel doesn't adequately assess cardiac disease, and that maybe the size of the LDL particles are more important. Even the Brits are onto this as well. They say saturated fat does not clog arteries. Coronary heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition, the risk of which can be effectively reduced with healthy lifestyle interventions. This is 2017 BMJ. So this is our big journals, our big, ivory tower researchers that are saying this, but it's not getting the press coverage that we need. So I have a bit of a protocol. I send this to all my patients. I have beef liver pate recipes, how to make this. At the end of this lecture, I have some links. You can follow my fiance's cooking channel on Instagram. She shows people how to make ancestrally appropriate foods. Tasty too. Beef liver tastes amazing if you make the recipe right. We have some recommendations for pasture and free-range organic eggs. So this is the ideal type of chicken egg. Chickens, unfortunately, are often fed a processed food diet to make them fat, as we alluded to earlier. So getting a high-quality chicken is better. I prefer patients, if they can't get a high-quality chicken, to just eat beef. Even if it's not a grass-fed beef, the cow has multiple stomachs, so they process out glyphosate and things a little bit better. I make a point to my patients to consume fruit that's seasonal and fruit that's organically raised. You know, again, because of the glyphosate problem, we know the problem with glyphosate. It's a mutagen, it's pro-inflammatory. So, you know, I tell my patients, if you can't buy organic or regeneratively raised fruits and vegetables, skip it and just focus on the meats. Are you going to get more bang for your buck there and less glyphosate? Here's also my point about calories in and calories out. So here you're kind of looking at 197 grams of protein. So for me, that's 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So what I do is protein leveraging. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, why that's important for the elderly population. It's very easy to maintain weight if you protein leverage, so increase the amount of protein you're consuming. We know very well that low carbohydrate, higher fats diets are good, but I like to point out a couple studies here that they're actually equivalent or better than the calorie in, calorie out manipulation for weight loss. And we know getting weight off our patients will reduce their inflammatory burden, less fat cells, less inflammation. And we know COVID and long COVID is an inflammatory disease. So getting the weight off patients is key. But these low carbohydrate, high fat diets are pretty good, even I'd say better or equal to calorie in, calorie out. Now, calories in, calories out still matters, and you can definitely overeat on a low carbohydrate, higher fat diet, but it just, it's easier to maintain this diet than telling the patient to count all their calories. But specifically for improving their metabolic profile, I like to point out this study that the low carbohydrate diet, it increases the LDL size. And if we remember what the American College of Cardiology said earlier, is that the size of the LDLs matters a little bit better. It decreases small and dense LDL particles, which are more pathologic for arterial disease. And they found a more protective LDL pattern A in the low carbohydrate group. I knew you can look at these patterns with the NMR or cardio IQ, and you can see what your patients are trending towards. But for the most part, what I see in patients on the SAD diet, the standard American diet, is pattern B types pretty routinely. I also like to point out higher protein diets. So people think, oh, a high protein diet, you can't do that for a diseased population. Well, look at this study here, the Pro Heart trial. And they didn't even do that high protein, in my opinion. They only did like a 30% protein diet, which I guess that's like, whoa, that's a lot of protein for someone with heart failure. But if you give someone heart failure a higher protein diet, they actually do better. Their outcomes are better. They have reduced weight and visceral fat, and they have greater reduction of cardiometabolic risks relative to the standard protein diet. So recommendations typically are like, oh, only 15% protein, okay? But this is not holding up to any sort of research coming out. And then I get to sarcopenia, which is an epidemic in all our patients. Specifically, I find the long COVID patient. They have low muscle mass. They have a lot of fat mass. They have fatty infiltrates. You can look at this under MRI if you get an MRI of your patient. I've even found that POCUS, so point of care ultrasound, Ultrasound Pro, I can look at their calf muscle. If I look at the calf muscle and it shows brightness, that means their muscle is streaked with fat. And I might do a YouTube video on this. I'll look at a Wagyu beef, and Wagyu beef is full of fatty infiltrates in the muscle. But this is what most of the American population is. 88%, I've seen as high as 92% are metabolically unhealthy. And this is essentially poor muscle tone. It's muscle streaked with fat, or muscle being replaced with fat. And that's sarcopenia. That's what we're dealing with here in a lot of the patient populations. So how do you fix this? You eat more protein intake, you do resistance training, you eat the ancestral diet, right? We don't see sarcopenia in primitive peoples, right? They're lean, they're muscular, their carbohydrate intake, at least in the tribes, as we will see later, that aren't exposed to the white man's diet, they don't have metabolic disease. But can a vegan diet reverse sarcopenia? Again, I see this on social media. Some vegan influencers, they say vegan diet, that's the way you reverse metabolic disease. And not the case. If we're looking at it from a muscle centric medicine approach, if you're doing high vegan diet, this is low protein intake, or low quality protein intake, I should say, right? Plant-based protein is not the same as meat-based protein. And you will see a significant decrease in muscle index and lean body mass in vegans compared to even vegetarian and omnivore groups. So vegetarians actually eat eggs, right? And then I hear often from patients, but isn't eating protein only good for bodybuilders or athletes like you? I'm like, no, the aging muscle contributes to so many of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. And you can measure these in the long COVID patients, your IL-6, your TNF alpha. These are the things we target, right, with low dose naltrexone and so forth. But we can also target the muscle. We could try to grow the muscle with resistance training, with the ancestral diet, with hormone optimization, of course, right? Which is what I talked about last time. So the aging muscle is pro-inflammatory. We want to prevent this. And then I hear also, but isn't eating lots of animal protein bad for your kidneys? And the answer is no, only in advanced chronic kidney disease already. Right. So if you have chronic kidney disease, you measure the patients. I also recommend measuring the cystatin C. This is the most accurate way to measure a patient's actual kidney function. So you get the creatinine, and you have to add additional tests called cystatin C. And it's as of 2021, it should be the gold standard of measuring kidney function tests. Specifically, if you see high creatinine in a patient who's eating a higher protein diet or is taking creatine as a supplement, or as a bodybuilder and growing lots of muscle, they will have high creatinine, which is just the breakdown of creatine. So you measure the cystatin C, and lo and behold, you won't have to send them to the nephrologist. You won't have to panic. You can measure it and be happy with their GFR with the appropriate calculation. Do you run that test?
I've actually never heard of it. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, it's should be gold standard as of 2021 is the cystatin C for measuring kidney disease. So what does my diet look like to easily maintain physique? So I protein leverage. So my diet is about 70% of my calories is from red meats, bison, beef, lamb, etc. A lot of eggs. I have a lot of chicken, so I eat a lot of eggs too, usually about 4 eggs a day minimum. I do eat fruit seasonally, and specifically around tennis tournaments, I'll eat more fruit just because it is higher in fructose, gives me that energy. Whereas actually this past tournament, I was playing an open down in Vero Beach, and in between changeovers, I was actually eating squash. I was just eating squash because of the fructose content in that. But in the summer, I'll often eat pineapples and higher fructose fruits. And then we think of fruits as healthy for patients, but specifically your patient with that metabolic syndrome with high fasting insulin, they won't respond normally to high fructose fruits. So I don't advise fruits, even though they're supposed to be antioxidant and so forth. If you have a metabolic syndrome patient, they're not an athlete, they won't have a normal insulin response to high fructose foods. All right, specifically, she shouldn't, a fatter patient with high fasting insulin shouldn't be eating pineapple, right? Maybe smaller berries, etc., but mostly just protein leveraging and more complex carbohydrates. So here's further what my diet kind of looks like. You see on the top left corner, I have beef kidney, I have bone marrow, I have some lamb here and sausage. It's a very tasty and simple stew. Slow cook it overnight, about 8 hours on low temperature. You can get this pretty affordably from BJ's and Costco. If you want to get a kidney, I order that online. And I have some resources for that, like White Oak Pastures, North Star Bison, US Wellness Meats. I actually involved in a local co-op here, and you can see I have a lot of raw milk. I had a patient just recently do a 5-day raw milk fast. He liked that a lot. But here's that squash I ate, a couple carrots. These are all regeneratively raised, so I know they're from a really good farm, and of course the raw dairy as well. And a lot of red meats. So foods that are neutral, we talk about on the ancestral diet: potatoes, rice, tubers. So these, unless you're getting a high quality one, they don't provide a lot of nutritional value. You can get decent potatoes and some rice, but difficult to find. Legumes, beans, a lot of people don't tolerate those very well. They have a lot of gut overgrowth or deep SIBO and dysbiosis, just makes them feel sick. So, avoid them. But if you do legumes, I advise soaking them typically in a bit of a probiotic. Back when my parents and family, we were macrobiotic, which was like a weird diet. It's like based on Michio Kushi, this Japanese guy who ended up dying of pancreatic cancer. Not a good diet to follow, but if you do follow, if you do eat these sort of grains, you have to soak them to reduce the phytic acid content and to allow them to be digested a bit better. And then dairy, I definitely have a big lecture on this, but I'll summarize it here, is that I think the term lactose intolerance is overused, when the more appropriate term should be lactulose intolerance. Now, lactulose, as you know, Dr. Haider, is a prescription laxative. We use it for patients with hepatic encephalopathy in the hospital. We use it for constipated children. So it's a very powerful medicine. It causes diarrhea. It's an osmotic laxative. Now, the interesting thing is that when you superheat milk, when you pasteurize it, when you ultra high pasteurize it, which allows it to sit on the shelf at Walmart for 4 months, not going bad, it actually converts lactose to lactulose. So you can actually give yourself a decent dose of an osmotic laxative by eating ultra processed dairy products, milk products from Walmart and Publix, all these places we buy our milk from. And then patients will say, well, I'm lactose intolerant. Well, is that right? And I put them on raw milk. They don't have lactose intolerance. They have lactulose intolerance. And the reason for that is the conversion of lactose to lactulose with the ultra high pasteurization process. But besides that, you damage proteins, these amino acids. There's a lot of benefits to amino acids, and you can supplement patients with, say, lysine, which is antiviral, right? But when you superheat milk, the Maillard reaction, it destroys lysine. So you can get a significant loss of lysine by heating milk. And so you're missing an antiviral protocol. And then there's obviously the enzymes that are degraded at very low temperatures, even 70 Celsius, you'll lose pretty much all of these enzymes that you could talk for a year about all the things that these things do. Lactoferrin is one of my favorite ones that I'm using currently in the prostate community trial. That plus ivermectin to treat prostate cancer. And we're having some fantastic results. You may want to bring me on to talk about that at some point, but that's a big thing I'm involved in. It's lactoferrin, an enzyme destroys the pasteurization process. We find it has antiviral, anti-COVID, and anti-cancer activity that's been gone from the human diet for 100 years since the pasteurization process. And then we talk about NAD. We all know Dr. David Sinclair. He's a big spokesperson for NAD. But then we see that, well, where can you find NAD? Well, you could find it in red meats, and you can see a lot of the overlap of pellagra, which is niacin deficiency or NAD deficiency and aging, and all these metabolic syndromes that we see in the US. It's involved in 500 biochemical or enzymatic processes in the body. I just actually gave myself an injection of NAD. Yes, you can inject NAD. You can take it in Sinclair's supplement form, or you can just get it from red meats. Red meats has the highest quantity of NAD on the planet. And again, the vegans will be like, well, is it all, you can get all your protein and stuff from plants. Well, not NAD and not a lot of other vitamins and creatine and carnitine and so forth. So red meat has the highest concentration of NAD out of anything, right? Rice doesn't come close. Potato doesn't come close. Wheat, forget about it, right? Wheat also doesn't, you don't extract all the protein out of wheat that you would say from like lamb or red meat either, okay? Almond butter and peanuts. I know peanut had some NAD in there, but a lot of people can't tolerate these nuts and these highly oxidized seed oils. They shouldn't be consuming them anyway. So I don't recommend plant-based options for NAD. And then we get into the high fructose corn syrup. This is in everybody's fridge. I look into these fridges, and then I look into their cabinets, and all their food is, even their bread products, their moldy bread is full of high fructose corn syrup. I did a house call the other day. I pulled out loaves of moldy bread from their fridge, and it had a lot of preservatives, a lot of high fructose corn syrup. I'm like, why do you even have this in your fridge? It's taking up free rent. Get rid of it, right? But we know that diabetes prevalence is 20% higher in countries with higher availability of high fructose corn syrup compared to countries with low availability. Gluten, I oftentimes will get my patients who come to me with long COVID off of gluten. And that's just because it causes a little bit of a breakdown in these tight junctions in their gut. This is a fantastic diagram. It shows you that all that separates our bloodstream from what's inside our gut is one cell layer, right? And you could break this with gluten, with processed bread products, and so I just recommend patients get off of gluten, and that's all glutens, pastas, breads, patients will ask me, well, is a rice pasta okay? Well, does it have gluten in there? No, you can eat rice. That's okay if you want a carb, but not the bread products, right? We try to heal that. And I do have a protocol to heal that as well. I use the peptide, BPC 157. It's pretty good at helping people heal their guts, along with colostrum, collagen, and then I also use the biocide. I'm actually going to do research for biocide soon on my protocol because I'm helping a lot of people heal their guts.
What's that last one? Biocide?
Yeah, biocide, and it's a botanical research company.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be putting some research together for them on that soon. And then here I like to show my my multi-mineral, my multivitamins here, mackerel, right? Plenty of omega-3s, very low omega-6s. Specifically, it's a good source of mackerel. You get a decent amount of vitamin D, and 403 units, not a whole lot, but decent amount. You get B12. But the important part of that is you're getting really bioavailable forms of these nutrients, right? You get magnesium, phosphorus, you get a little bit of zinc, selenium, and then you get all your amino acids, right? Fantastic. And then my favorite is the beef liver, right? Cheap multivitamin. You get a whole bunch of vitamin A, right? And then I get some functional medicine people will tell me, oh, but vitamin A, you can get toxicity from that. Yes, if you eat polar bear liver and you're an Arctic explorer, that's the only time liver has ever caused toxicity. It's in this rare case, but I hear this all the time. Selenium also, I like this. So beef liver has selenium in there, 52%. We know selenium is anti-cancer, antioxidant, fantastic mineral. Everybody's deficient in it. And we can get a bit of selenium. You add some Celtic sea salt and you get your iodine and your selenium, right? Oh, and here's my point about the beef, because this is very interesting. So it's liver abscesses are such a huge problem in the cattle industry. About 60% of these cattle fed grains and vegetable oils will get a liver abscess. But the cows raised on the pasture or raised on grass primarily, they don't have this problem. But what does agriculture want to do? They want to develop a vaccine to prevent liver abscesses. I can't stand it. It drives me nuts. And we apply this to humans as well. I worked in urgent cares for a long time. I saw so many patients with abscesses. They're always coming in, got to cut open their abscesses. There's purulent stuff coming out of them. It's all from crap that they're being fed every day, right? Again, we're not using the animal models, applying it to humans. We're thinking they're completely separate and they're only applicable to clinical trials. No, we know what the farmers are seeing, right? We can apply this to humans. A lot of humans are eating like cattle diets, like a grain-fed cattle diet. It's not good. And then glyphosate is another reason I don't have a huge recommendation for plants, because, you know, I work with a low-income population that can't afford to buy organic, regenerative raised plants. So I just recommend just focus on the ancestral diet or the animal-based diet for the most part, right? The Eskimo diet. I like this one. This is a fantastic little article that I think every clinician should read. So this was done in the 1950s, and these were contemporaries of the infamous Ansel Keys. Ansel Keys gave us the lipid hypothesis for the next 50, 70 years now, the lower saturated fat. However, this guy here studying the Eskimos in the Arctic said that he definitely disproved the alleged incidence of arteriosclerosis in the Eskimo, at least in the Eastern Arctic. So he was a contemporary of Ansel Keys, and he didn't get a lot of press for this, right? He didn't find any arterial disease in these Eskimos, even though they ate primarily fat from seals. They ate a lot of seal fat and red meats. That's really much what they lived off of. And it's well known that to weaken the population of the Native Americans back in the Wild West days, they massacred the bison. You remove their NAD source, where you remove their red meat source, and it weakens the population, right? And this is another contemporary of Ansel Keys, this ophthalmologist who is looking at the eyes of the Eskimos. Now, the Eskimos that were fed the white man's diet, they quickly developed the metabolic disease that we see in the eye. And what was his solution? Did he advise laser surgery and so forth? They didn't have that back then. He advised the ancestral diet for these Eskimos, and it reversed their ocular disease. Now, why can't we apply this to the average population here, right? Why does it just have to be natives, Eskimos, right? We're not much different than them, except well, we're not different at all. The other point I like to make is that tuberculosis was most likely endemic to the Eskimos. They lived with it in their lungs, and it only surfaced and gave disease when they ate the white man's diet, which was jams and wheat products. And then they started dying of tuberculosis. And it wasn't like they suddenly were contagious with tuberculosis. No, tuberculosis most likely was an evolutionary friend that produced NAD in times of meat starvation. This is a fantastic article. Again, I recommend every clinician to read. The International Journal of Tryptophan Research, published in 2017. It's basically kind of this anthropological historical account of NAD decreases and increases throughout the basically human civilization and how they related to epidemics and pandemics. Absolutely fascinating. But essentially, the summary is more meat equals less tuberculosis. And you can see this again and again throughout history, where people, when they were starved of meat, starved of NAD, they got more tuberculosis. CoQ10, eat your beef heart.
That the tuberculosis was somewhat beneficial for people.
Yeah. So it would produce NAD. It would live in the lungs. It would produce NAD in times of meat starvation so that your brain could function. So it's kind of a symbiont. Kind of weird, right? CoQ10, again, eat your beef heart raw. So you can preserve more of your vitamins that way and coenzymes, or cook your meats lightly. That's why we like steaks medium rare, or more on the rare side in the middle. Not just because it's more flavorful, but you preserve your nutrients that way. And then fermented foods. The Cree word uskupo means he who eats meat raw. And this was what the Cree called the Eskimos. They had some pretty nasty habits, right? They would ferment kivyak, consists of hundreds of dead outbirds stuffed into a dead seal and left to ferment under a rock for around 3 months. Yeah, the Eskimos, they really liked the weird. They would bury fish in the snow and let it sit there and ferment, and then they would eat this as kind of like a luxury food. I don't know if we're gonna get into that, but we can at least do kefir. I love kefir. Fermented milk has actually anti-COVID properties, antiviral properties, and anti-cancer properties, right? Reduction of IL-6 and NF-kappa B. So we don't have to ferment fish under the snow, but we could at least get a bit of raw kefir into the diet. Collagen peptides, I think everyone should put this into their coffee in the morning, whether it's marine collagen or bovine collagen. Just take a scoop, put it into your coffee. Helps prevent osteoarthritis, treat it even, improves your skin texture. It's anti-inflammatory, improves your arterial health as well. Can even be used as a topical burn application. So a lot of benefits to getting back in collagen, which you can find this in marine. You can get it from a soup. If you slow cook bone marrow, you can get some collagen that way. If you slow cook the head of a fish, as our ancestors would have done, you can get collagen that way. But getting it hydrolyzed and putting it into your coffee is a modern solution to this. So in conclusion, as the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, summarized so perfectly, it's time to shift the public health message in the prevention and treatment of coronary artery disease away from measuring serum lipids and reducing dietary fat. That's pretty much it. All I have for you, a couple resources here I can send you on where to buy some of these organ meats if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a few questions. So you mentioned that, it is easier to lose weight on a low carb, high fat diet, presumably because it stimulates the appetite less. I mean, you actually do end up eating less, calories just naturally. You don't have to like force yourself to eat less, I would assume is the effect that they're seeing in studies.
Yeah, so what specifically ketogenic diets do is they supposedly suppress ghrelin. And ghrelin is a hormone that signals to appetite. It works for some people. Some people, they can still overeat on a ketogenic diet. I've seen that happen. I like the ancestral diet particularly because if you eat organ meats, you will get also a lot of nutrients, which has another signaling method that tells us that we're full. I think the reason Americans overeat so much is one is they don't get that nutrient signaling to our brain. So we evolved with a very complex mechanism that I don't really fully understand, that we know when we get enough nutrients and it stops hunger, but Americans are nutrient deprived. So they just keep eating and they eat the seed oils that messes up with their mitochondria even further and further stimulates appetite.
So you have had patients or you have seen people who tried to eat an ancestral diet end up still not having trouble metabolically or having trouble losing weight?
Oh, no, if someone follows the ancestral diet or they protein leverage, so they eat lion's diet or carnivore diet, this is a very efficient way of losing fat. I have a couple of patients sent me pictures, kind of striking pictures recently of their body just kind of shrinking, right? They're just losing all that extra fat. I think protein leveraging, I mean, it's been well known in the bodybuilding community for a long time that you leverage how much protein you intake to suppress the appetite or fill yourself up. But now we're applying this kind of athlete or bodybuilder application to the average primary care patient, and we're seeing some pretty dramatic results if they do follow the ancestral diet.
Okay, but the key is adding organ meats essentially to get all the micronutrients that are missing from somebody who's just doing keto with like they're just eating steak all day and ham.
Yeah, because when you eat keto, you can totally overeat processed fats, cheeses, and so forth. So you could definitely eat too many calories doing that way. But if you've ever eaten a bit of beef liver, you get so full from just a couple bites of that, you don't want to eat any more. So it's very different.
Right. Yeah, great. You mentioned a 5-day raw milk fast. What was the reason for that?
I do this on occasion for patients who want to try out something. So we do a different type of fast here. We do the Prolon fast developed by Dr. Walter Longo. We do that to improve insulin sensitivity. I just had a patient complete a 5-day protocol of that, and we saw her fasting insulin go from 16 to 10, so pretty good. I had a patient recently, he did a what's it called? A water fast. Well, I had him do an electrolyte water fast, and his triglycerides dropped precipitously. I may even have the study here. Let's see, triglycerides. And let me see if I can find it. And it was quite a striking case. His triglycerides drops just with a water fast for 5 days. But then the milk fast, had a couple of patients do that. If you look at some of what the old 1900s physicians were doing, they were prescribing raw milk fasts, curing all sorts of interesting ailments. So I have some patients who read some of this, they want to try it out. So I'll be putting together some cases of this for motivated patients to see what we can do, all sorts of disease processes.
Yeah, I know it's hard to get raw milk in every state, every location, but some of the places that you can get it are like pet food stores. We found you can buy raw milk, and some places where you can't get it for humans, you can find it for pets, or you can go direct to the farm. And I think there is a raw milk like website.
Yeah, it's called Real Milk.
Realmilk.com. Yeah, where you can.
Yeah, you can find it. It's out there.
Great. All right. So yeah, I found it interesting the point about the soybean oil. Soybeans have these estrogenic chemicals, and that just hits our estrogen receptors, and it makes us fat too. It's not just the chickens, for sure. You had mentioned that it's cheap to eat ancestrally. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems like a lot of the junk food are, it's cheaper calories, or are they actually more expensive than like people would imagine that buying a lot of meat would end up being expensive compared to buying, flour products?
Yeah. So the way it works is your overall caloric intake will be lower. So one, your budget per calorie is going to be lower. The second is that you can't eat out doing the ancestral diet. So you're going to save your money on restaurants. I mean, if you go to Chick-fil-A, you're getting their menu, you end up spending probably $17 there. So you eat the ancestral diet, you go to Publix, you can get frozen beef liver in the frozen section, grass-fed, mind you, and it's about $6 for a pound. A pound of beef liver, that'll keep you going for a while. You can live off of that for a while. That if you add that in 6 ounces every day, you will be very full, eat overall much less. And then you go to BJ's, you go to Costco, and you buy your ground beef. I typically recommend like an 85%. So we get the fattier one. Of course, we never go for the lean one, like the 92%. We need the fats. And so you get it like that, and it's about $15, maybe $20 for like a 3-pack. And so that's about 3-4 pounds of beef. You can get bison, ground bison at BJ's for about $18 for a 2-pack. This is super filling foods. I can go through maybe a pound of beef a day. Most people can't. They don't have the protein requirements, so they're not trying to build mass like I am. So, if you're eating that and beef liver, once, twice daily, maybe get some organic squash, you're looking at maybe $5, $7 a day for food. Wow. So pretty affordable. And especially if you're cooking it at home and you're not eating out, you're going to save a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Minus the supplements, of course, too. Quicksilver Scientific Methyl B complex is like $40.
Right. Yeah, and you've got all those things in the food that you're eating. So when people go on this, do you find that a lot of people, it just clears up all their problems, and then who are the people left over that, this kind of approach, if they really commit to it, they're still left with a problem? And what are those kind of problems, and why do you think that they haven't been able to get, completely healed by just following an ancestral diet lifestyle?
Yeah, typically what we see when I go to a house call and we make the changes for a whole family and the whole family gets on board, what we see is a reduction in child illnesses. So instead of calling their primary care or using urgent cares, 10 times throughout the year, is maybe 1 sick call a year, right? We see a drastic reduction in the amount of like mucus sort of congestion, cough, cold, sinus sort of nonsense that predominates urgent cares and so forth. We just see that number drastically reduce. The second thing we see is much more vitality and energy. Patients have more drive, more motivation. So this allows them to get into the gym more, grow muscle, right? Get more things done, start a business. So they have more energy that way. Now, patients who are left over who don't improve typically are ones who are not very good about the diet, so they can't follow it. They're still going out to Arby's. They're working at a job, a shift job, and they feel sorry about themselves, so they order in Domino's or something. So they're not very good about the diet, and they don't see the results, right? If you see the results, and if you follow the diet, you will see the results, and literally your brain will change. You will no longer even crave. You won't even see processed food as food anymore. It looks alien to you. You have no drive for it at all. But if you do the seed oils, if you're sprinkling it throughout the diet, you will still have urges for those. They're highly addictive foods. I explained this to patients. I know a food scientist. She's paid $200,000 a year. Her full-time job, 40 hours a week, along with other researchers, is to scientifically modify food to make it as addictive as possible. We have very smart PhD, like MIT researchers, trying to make food addictive. You cannot beat this by, doing it sometimes or sprinkling on some soybean oil or condiment here. Highly addictive stuff. You have to completely eliminate it from the diet. You can't go halvesies on this stuff. We're not smart enough to beat all the research involved in making food addictive.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you focus on other, I know food is probably one of the most important things for people, but other aspects of like ancestral living, what other things do you think are most important for people achieving, lasting health?
Yeah, so sunlight, vitamin D deficiency is rampant. You can't really get that from the diet. Mackerel has maybe 400 units. We need at least 10,000 units a day. And what I find is people vastly underestimate how much sunlight they're getting. I challenge people to do this is to download the free app called D-Minder. It's a fun little game. You calculate where you are geographically. You explain how much of your body is exposed to the sun. You hit the start button and you sit out in the sunlight, and you'll see how long it takes to absorb 10,000 units of vitamin D. Most people, they wear a shirt, they wear a hat, they're probably lathering up with sunscreen as well. So maybe 5% of their body is exposed to the sunlight at maybe 6 p.m. after work. You're not going to get any sunlight that way. No vitamin D. You probably see this routinely as well, as vitamin D levels like 25, 29. No one can get above 60. And 60 is where we see all the benefits. You get to 80, you're really doing good. You got anti-cancer benefits at that point. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's sunlight exposure. And if you can't do that and work shift, you got to take 10,000 units a day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people have trouble with like sleep as well. That's I think a big problem.
Sleep, yeah. So sleep, that's I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve for sleep, and I might do a lecture for you on that. But I'm highly involved in peptides, in hormone optimization. We can do some amazing things with those and completely regenerate sleep for people.
Wow. Okay. So which kind of hormones and peptides are the most important?
So for women, progesterone. You give women progesterone at night, they'll sleep better than they have in 20 years. That's what they typically, the first night is what women will tell me. For men, is testosterone. Getting their testosterone up, they'll sleep deeper, they'll recover better. And then the next one is growth hormone, and specifically growth hormone peptides. And we see a massive improvement in sleep with doing things like CJC, ipamorelin, MK677, tesamorelin. These things are fantastic for sleep. And then epitalon, I've been using that one recently, and we're seeing that one's really potent. It's a peptide that works on the pineal gland, and it essentially resets people's melatonin, and we see this massive improvement in sleep with that one.
Do you have to keep taking it?
No, you just have to cycle it. You do a couple cycles of it, and resets the pineal gland.
So where do you learn about these kind of peptides? I mean, what's a good resource for somebody like me?
My YouTube channel. I research all this stuff, the primary literature. I go through, the ex-Soviet Union research that's been out there. It's all been converted into English. That's really where all this research comes from, is the Russian scientists in the Cold War era.
Have you looked into dry fasting? I know that was in the Russian literature.
Yeah, I don't like dry fasting. I think people need their water and electrolytes.
Yeah, how much water do you think people need? I know that there's a lot of different opinions on this.
Well, they don't need so much water. Is what they need is they need a balanced crystalloid, right? So we know in the hospital, in the surgical setting, you'd never give patients IV water, it'd kill them. You always got to give them nutrients and minerals with it. So I like a mineral water like the San Pellegrino that I'm sipping, or just sprinkling a little bit of electrolytes back into your water. So if you get like a Zephyr Hill spring water, great. Add have a packet of the element electrolytes that has sodium, potassium, and magnesium in there. Just a little bit of minerals, giving it back to your body. You'll find patients have more energy, more mental clarity, and it's just because all their cells are just full of, they're swollen. They're sick swells from lack of minerals. Called hypotonic. We learned about this in pre-med. We learned like, if the drowning victim has swollen cells, that's why they die. Their cells burst. I find typically that patients have no minerals, no sodium, potassium, and magnesium, which is what our cells use to communicate. And so they're sluggish, and their cells are sluggish, and their brain is sluggish. You give them back the minerals, and they'll feel better.
Yeah, I mean, something I learned recently was how important, I've heard of how important magnesium is, but specifically the link to vitamin D. It's really one of those requirements. You can have a normal vitamin D level, but I think a lot of people are magnesium deficient. You don't have proper vitamin D signaling without magnesium. and hundreds of other chemical reactions that it's required for. And that's another problem that people think that they can just eat the food, but if the food quality isn't really high, like you said, with the regenerative agriculture, you just may not be getting the micronutrients in the food.
Well, yeah, interesting thing. Even for myself, I identified I was magnesium deficient, and I only identified this through the Genova Diagnostics metabolomics test, urine metabolite. So I drink coffee every morning, and coffee depletes magnesium. And so I identified this, and I have been since supplementing with magnesium every day, and I no longer have this eye twitch that I used to have. My eye would like twitch like that.
Oh. Yeah, I've had that sometimes myself. All right, so tell us where you mentioned your YouTube channel. I guess is it Iron DPC?
Iron Direct Primary Care is the YouTube channel. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media through that.
Okay, so people can look up Iron Direct Primary Care, but the website is also Iron Direct Primary Care?
Yeah, I'm found on Google that way, or irondpc.com by URL.
Awesome. In which states do you see patients in?
Right now, only Florida, only licensed here.
All right. Yeah. I'm looking into the First Nations Medical Board. I don't know if they would be able to work with.
Yeah. Have you linked up with Dr. Avery Jackson yet?
I think I just got on an email chain with him. He's also working on like a private membership association.
Yeah, I think I sent you that. He was going to give us a lecture on what he's doing. But yeah, he's doing something similar, kind of creating a parallel health system so we can help more people.
Yeah, I think it's The Body. Is that his?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Do they have a website?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Because if it's actually up and running, I would love to join it.
Yeah, you just email them, and then you can definitely join them. It's really affordable for clinicians. It's only like $50 a month, and they're hosting like CME lectures, so you can actually get CME credits for attending some of the lectures. And I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing is that you can start to see patients all over the place and kind of sidestep the usual kind of healthcare regulatory bodies. And
yeah,
and also with him, I mean, I read through some of his founding documents, and I think a big part of it is extricating yourself from the possibility of being sued by people. So I think that's also important for a lot of people, especially working in alternative medicine. All right, great. I mean, I think we're up at almost an hour here. So any final thoughts? Can you connect this back to long COVID? I mean, have you had long haulers recover without supplementation? Have any of your long haulers or vaccine injured patients fully committed to like an ancestral diet lifestyle?
I've had someone who dabbled in it. I have this one, she's vaccine injured. I can't get her to eat organ meats. She's iron deficient. She's fatigued and dizzy. She just can't eat the liver. And I'm like, she's like, can you write me a prescription for iron infusion? I'm like, I don't know what you think of iron supplementation, iron infusion. I'm just not a huge fan of that. I think it might have some risks for cancer.
Yeah, no, I think it does have some risks. I mean, some people, but what about the capsules? I mean, I know it's not the same as like raw organ meat, but
capsules are a good second option.
I mean, and what about cooking in like iron cookware? Is that,
no, because that's inorganic iron. That's not heme iron. And that's where, again, I get in conflict with the vegans that they say all iron is equal. No, only red meat has heme iron that you actually need. And the inorganic iron, I think that has a risk for cancer.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So there's really, so you really need red meat for the heme iron.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's another topic that I need to look into more, but I mean, I've heard about it already, but I haven't really examined it in a lot of detail. I mean, it's not a big deal for me. I mean, I do definitely eat. I love organ meats and, red meat and everything, but for some people, it's really difficult to convince some people who have bought into the whole, vegan kind of approach to things. And they've supplanted the vegetarians even, it's like, if you try to figure out if something's vegetarian, you don't get any hit result, search results on Google. It's all vegan, is it vegan? It's almost like they've completely replaced vegetarians.
Well, it's for us guys, the only risk with the ancestral diet is actually too much iron. So we have to make a habit of donating blood. Not
Mhm.
such an issue for premenstrual women. They bleed, they basically bloodlet every month. But for us and postmenopausal women, they may have to go and donate to relieve some of that iron burden, which I think iron burden causes a decent amount of disease in people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, do you think that these traditional cultures, I mean, how do you think they balance that for the men?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
No
There
wonder.
may have been some blood. I mean, certainly there was in a lot of traditional kind of medical systems, there was this idea of bloodletting, you know, when
Yes,
people were sick.
there
So
was. That's how they cured a lot of ailments in the past. It was the bloodletting. We thought it was barbaric or ritualistic, but they may have been onto something there. The leeches, get out the leeches.
yeah, the leeches. All right, man. This was great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this. And we'll send you the link once it's ready. We're going through some like post-production stuff, and we're planning to put it up on Long COVID Reset. It's kind of like a monthly subscription option for people where they can see like ongoing stuff. And we'll look forward to setting something up. We're going to be doing the Long COVID Reset, like a whole nother, summit. So we'll be in touch with you about putting that together in the next few months.
All right.
I think aiming for, sometime in the fall, early fall.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Thank you so much. It's always really a pleasure. I'm going to look up your YouTube channel now and learn more.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for
Good
all the work
stuff.
you do.
All right. Talk soon.
All right. Bye.